Today, world of info is the world of books. And you know the rule of the game that I play with you usually, which is I give you a resume about the books that I've been reading in the past months or the past days or few days. And I share with you my opinion about these books, and I give you some suggestions. Should we read the book? Should we toss it? Should we skim it? And usually the lump sum of the game is that I always advise you that you should read it, because I have consumed some time in reading, and this is very interesting to share with you the information. People always tend to ask, how can somebody squeeze in time for reading a book, and especially if this book is a long book. Should we have the time to read it or skim it or pass through it, or should we teach ourselves to read as possible, as fast as possible? Well, actually, to answer this sophisticated question is by simply just read. And reading is very important to have the skill to read, because skimming is not the right way of reading books. Some people would advise that you would read the first word of a paragraph and then go to the second, and then go to the middle of the paragraph and the third part of the paragraph, and then you would try to figure out what this paragraph was about. And I think this is not the right thing. It's much easier to have a time for reading. If you are reading 1 hour a day, and this is you are using your mother tongue, for example, if we are reading Arabic book and we are Arabs or Egyptians, then most probably you will be ending up in 1 hour reading at least 40 to 50 pages. And if you are reading by your second language, this is English or French, you'll be reading in 1 hour what exactly could sum up to 30 to 40 pages. With the number of pages that are written in any book, nowadays the books are not reaching usually the number of 1,000 pages as they used to be, because the editors try to apply the motto that we know, which is write and we put it right. Always we can find nowadays, especially in books that are published in the West. I'm speaking about books published in England or the UK or in the United States of America in English, because this is my second language that I talk with and I like to read with. You'll find yourself figuring the story is that the prose is becoming much easier to understand. The words just go on running very easily. Every sentence is not that long so that you can really get lost in before reaching the end of it, and it's not that short that it carries nonsense talk. The sentences are put in a very clever mode, and the abbreviations are made much easier, and the referral to previous paragraphs is made every now and then to keep you knitting the whole network of the story, whether this is a story, a non-fiction book, or a historical book. You'll find yourself going through the lines much easier than it used to be when you're talking about books that were written in the 90s and the 80s and even previously. Therefore, we can always find ourselves immersed in reading a book. And when we talk about books and how to read, will 1 hour be enough? Yes. If you are reading the books of today, they are between 200 to 300 pages, except for huge mammoth books which could reach 700 and 900 pages. So if you are reading a book that is 200 or 300 pages, you can easily finish one book a week. If we are talking about your mother tongue, that's Arabic, and you are accustomed to read in Arabic, you'll find yourself reading up to 2 books per week. But in English, you would read maybe 1 book a week, and this will be quite enough. So how to find an hour? Well, easy. It's easy to find an hour if we stop skimming and scanning on the Facebook, or on the other social media lines or media fields that we are observing every day. If we don't watch TVs or short films or short jokes, we'll find ourselves having at least 1 decent hour to read. And how to find out what we should read or not? I would advise you to look into the culture pages of the different journals, whether these are Arab journals or American journals or whatever. You will always find a section that is summarizing books, Al-Ahram recently has started taking care of writing this. The New York Times has its own preview of books that's called the New York Times bestsellers, and of course the New York Times, and of course we have the British journals, the French journals, all the journals, the Sharq al-Awsat, all have a page about culture where they try to summarize a book to attract your attention to read this book. How to get the books? It's becoming very much easier than it used to be. In the beginning, you have to go to different libraries and different bookshops to get books for yourself to read, but you'll end up finding a simple solution is by downloading these books into your small computer or iPad or whatever, and you'll find on the notebook, and you'll find yourself easily going and reading them. How expensive this is, it depends on the site that you are downloading it, and usually the price is quite reasonable. So excuse me. So this is how you develop the sense of reading. My aim is to try to give you an idea about the books that I have chosen to read within the short period that passed. And by now you know the rule of the game, as I mentioned, and today we are talking about 3 interesting books, and these books I'll tell you about them after the break. So still listening to the World of Info, and today is the World of Books, and the 3 books that I'm presenting today, each book has its own story and its own place in my heart or in my mind, and what has driven me to read or to give you an idea about is simply because the topic of the book is very interesting. We have 3 books today. The first book is by Otto English, and Otto English is the pen name of a British writer called Andrew Scott, and the book is called Fake History: 10 Great Lies and How They Shaped the World. That's interesting. That's definitely interesting. And the second book is about Cairo, the city and the memories, by Rasha Adli, and she's talking about Cairo, and Cairo is the city that we're living in. It is the radio station that you are listening in, and definitely any book about Cairo will deserve our attention and definitely our due respect, and trying to go through the pages of this book to attract your attention to the history and the beauty of the country or the city that you are living in, or you are having it as your capital. And the third book is Victoria and Albert, and it's talking about the museum of Victoria and Albert, and it's a souvenir that was bought by from the museum itself, and it talks about the history of Victoria and Albert Museum, a museum that is a must-see and an experience that I passed through to see and for my eyes and myself in different occasions that I visited the United Kingdom, and every time I always go to 2 places and I have to see them. That's the British Museum and the Victoria and Albert Museum, and these places are for free and you can go on there without paying any tickets, but it's going to be mesmerizing to watch the collection and the huge collection of Victoria and Albert, and there's nothing better than sharing what the museum creators decided to give you in their beautiful small guidebook, and they've called it Victoria and Albert, a souvenir. And yes, definitely it's a souvenir. So let's start right away by the first book, which is a book that really has attracted my attention. I had to buy it when I saw it, and I thought that it's recently published. I have 2 copies of it, a print copy that I dedicated to a friend, and an electronic copy that I was reading in the past week, and I found myself reading it very rapidly, and it's called The Fake History: The 10 Great Lies and How They Shaped the World. As I said to you, our dear listeners, Andrew Scott is the writer of this, and he has given himself an English name and a pen name called Otto English. And why Otto English? Well, the man always liked to be different than others. He likes to share his different ideas about Britain and about history, and usually the information that he gives are usually a bit shocking. And it comes to tell you about the 10 great lies that lies in the minds of ourselves and our generation and the generation after us, or the generation behind us, simply about certain ideas that we take completely as facts. So, for example, he's dealing with, in his 10 chapters, about Winston Churchill, that Winston Churchill was Britain's great Prime Minister. And of course, we have in this program presented a beautiful book by Tariq Ali, the famous British historian, and he's also a professor in Cambridge, and he is originally from India. He has written a beautiful book about Churchill, and he called it His Time, Churchill, Winston Churchill, His Times and His Crimes. And so the question is, or the fact that people tend to think that it is a real fact, is Winston Churchill, was he Britain's greatest Prime Minister? And the second point is talking about different other points. But let's take every point and see the point of view of Otto English, or should we say Andrew Scott. When he talked about Winston Churchill, was he the Britain's greatest Prime Minister? And the answer is definitely not. He was a great man. He was a man of great talent, a great politician, a very cultured man. He has great oratorial experience, and he is definitely a man who belongs to a mixed heritage. His mother was an American wealthy lady who married to his father, who was the son and the heir of Duke Marlborough, and this makes him coming from a very noble family, and which he quite was able in the beginning of his life to use very cleverly. When he joined the school, and he didn't like that school very much, and he was not getting very high marks, and his father was not very happy with him. Unfortunately, his father died early in the life of Winston Churchill, and his mother, who died later on when he was a minister and even in a bigger post, she was a great help to him all through his life, and she guided him through, and she has given him the full support for him to reach whatever success he made. He went to the school, and after school he went to St. Harris, graduated as a second lieutenant, and he found out that the army life might not be that beautiful or joyous for him. He resigned his post, became a journalist, and he has become a very well-known journalist because he was a military journalist going on with the Boer War, and he was arrested by the Boers, and definitely he was able to escape, and he has written that experience in a beautiful prose in articles and books that he published. He even went to with Kitchener to Sudan, and so he has his own experience in South Africa, in Sudan, and in Omdurman, and all this put a lot of cultural and oratorial experience. Through his skills as a journalist, he was able to secure himself, and his links, he was able to secure a place for himself in the parliament, to be an elected member of the parliament. He has seen his upsides and his downsides, and to answer the question that is definitely put by Andrew Scott, was he the greatest Prime Minister of the UK? And the answer definitely not. Was he the right man in the right place? The answer is definitely yes, in 1940 onwards. But before that, he was not the right man in the right place. Whether this during his when he joined the ministerial posts in 1910 and 1909, and he was the Minister of Interior, and he has caused a lot of problems in suppressing the criminals, and did this and that, and of course in World War I, when he was the Lord of Admiralty, and when he was responsible for the plan of Gallipoli, which led to a big catastrophe that led to the loss of a lot of lives of not only British or New Zealanders or Australians in Gallipoli, which is his presumed expedition to destroy or to reach Istanbul, and they failed. But also there were a lot of victims from Indian soldiers, and of course from Egyptians as well. All of these died on the beaches of Gallipoli because of his wrong decision of going there. His role in trying to combat the Irish Revolution in 1919 also was a failure afterwards. So he was definitely slowly but surely recovering from the catastrophe of Gallipoli, until it came out to him after the Chamberlain failed in after doing this treaty with Hitler, and after the Germans decided to attack Poland. Definitely he was forced to resign, and Churchill became the Prime Minister. His role as a Prime Minister during the war was very clever in order to maintain the integrity of Britain, and in order to convince and to have the time to share the information with Roosevelt, and convincing him to go into the war and give full support to the British in the war. His role definitely afterwards, whether his prime ministership with some catastrophic decisions like the famine that happened in Calcutta, or in Dhaka, nearby in the eastern part of India, the famine that happened because his decision not to release the amount of grains that should supply the people, or his mistake in 1950s when he returned as a prime minister for a short tenure, and his suggestion was to suppress the Kenyan liberation movement, and a lot of atrocities were made. So for Otto English, or for Andrew Scott, he thinks that definitely Churchill was not the right prime minister, and therefore he failed in the elections directly after the war. So he was not the greatest prime minister. Now, then we go to another important question, which always we have, that ancient people thought that Earth was flat until Christopher Columbus came and proved it. Well, actually, this is not true. It goes back very many years and many centuries before, where the people proved that the world was not flat, and Christopher Columbus was not the guy who proved that it was rounded, and that if you start in Portugal, you end up in Portugal again. No, it was proved before through the work of the astronomers, of the work of the geographers, and they were able to prove, looking at the stars, how the Earth is turning around and turning by, and all this stuff. So another myth is trying to combat that ancient people were not right. They never thought that the Earth was flat. And then we reach another question, which is, could Britain have lost the war in the World War II? And the answer is no. Although Hitler has decided to bombard and bomb Britain, he didn't have enough army, or enough air force, or enough navy to invade Great Britain. He was never going to have the power to invade Britain. Through the political abilities of Churchill, he was able to rally the whole of the people of Britain behind him, and putting them on the edge of fear that Britain can be conquered. And therefore the people rallied behind him. The amount of all the possible means to combat the Germans and the Nazi machine were put under his authority, and his way of convincing Roosevelt to support Britain. All this has solved the problem that actually Britain was never going to lose the war, especially, of course, definitely after Hitler made the great disaster by attacking the Soviet Union, and of course losing his wars and battles all over the field of World War II. Another question is that we put ourselves and we say we have the misinformation that the Royal British family is German, and this is totally not true. They have some roots in Germany. They have some families, members who belong to Germany, but they are definitely Brits. Until the reign of William IV, who died in 1838, and he was the King of Britain and, of course, the King of Hanover. But the law goes that the Hanover can never throne can never be given to a lady. So the next to the throne was Queen Victoria or Princess Victoria. She is the niece of William the Fourth, and because William IV didn't have legitimate children, he had actually 10 illegitimate children from his mistress, but he didn't have any children from his wife. So the throne went to Victoria, who was the niece of William III, and therefore after that there was never the British king or queen were never given the title of the King of Hanover. So they have some traces. All the families of the royal families of Europe had mixed blood, and because they used to have a lot of intermarriages, a lot of kings and crown princes used to marry people from Germany and people from France, but royalties, but of course they tended to marry more or less from the Protestant side, because the Germans, 2/3 of the population were Protestant, and the Anglican Church is not Catholic, so always the intention of the royal family was not to marry from France, but they could marry from Germany or from the Netherlands or whatever, who have the religion of the Protestants. So the royal family is not purely German, as we might say. Another fact that people tend to miss was saying that curry comes from India, and this is not true. Yes, it is. Curry is not actually, except some of the spices that are caused, they were coming from Sri Lanka mainly, and of course it was popular in Britain from the visits that were paid by the Eastern Indian Company, and later on the Indian Army, the British Army, when they went there. But in the end, it was a sort of food that attracted the attention of the people, but it is not just coming from India per se, but from a lot of food coming from different places in the subcontinent. And also we have another misnomer which says that the Aztecs were slaughtered by the conquerors or the Spanish conquerors, while actually the Aztecs were a very brute civilization that used to slaughter a lot of its subjects in the name of giving them away for the sun. And you know the famous scenes of old films when they slaughter the victim or whatever, usually a prisoner of war or whatever, an enemy. They used to slaughter even their own subjects as sort of sacrifice for the god of sun on the top of their pyramids. So the number of people who got killed or chopped their heads is much more higher than the number that have been prosecuted by the Spanish. This does not mean that the Spaniards, when they came, were kind people or that they were not conquerors, but in the point of the Aztec or the beheading, the Aztec empire was definitely doomed because of the number of atrocities that they were doing to their own people. Another fact that is a misnomer, which is that Abraham Lincoln believed that all men are created equal. Well, we know that Abraham Lincoln is really a revered president, the president who has chosen to keep the Union, the president who has chosen to liberate the slaves, and he was entered into the Civil War to protect the integrity of the United States of America. And yes, he was a real politician and a man with principles, but definitely being a man of principles, he knew quite well as a politician that he couldn't always put the idea of that all people are equal, because this would really alienate some of his allies, who would put him always under the edge of scrutiny, saying that if he is that liberal, then we will not support him that much. So the wordings of Abraham Lincoln were always mixed with the political spices, so that he could always keep the integrity of the Union with him. And he didn't always say that he never said that the black and the white were completely equal. So maybe he has believed in that, but in his as a politician he didn't show that. He showed it through his actions, but it's not through his complete statements. Then as we go about the myth behind this. For example, they say that Hitler was a failed artist, or Churchill was a good artist. If only Hitler would have succeeded as an artist, maybe he wouldn't have become Hitler, and he have destroyed the world that we know today. Or if Churchill has become a real painter, could he have stopped the politics? These are wrong mythology that goes on and lingering in our minds and in our feelings, and we think that you can always create the myth. Definitely Hitler was a bad painter. Definitely his work of paint only is of historical value, not of cultural value. But this just full stop. The man was completely racist. He was completely under severe psychological and psychopathic problems. He has caused the world a lot of hazards and hardships, and we always would have known that he propagated about himself the information, or created the myth in the beginning that he was a nationalist, he was God sent, he was protected, and he survived the World War I to help the German people. He had this fixed false belief, which is the definition of schizophrenia, a fixed false belief that he was on the good side of history. And of course, this is not totally right, not wrong, not right at all. Then we could go further in the book, and we say, what are the other points beside doing or the myth of Hitler and Churchill? We can say that he passed into another important point, which is if Napoleon was able to conquer Britain and to become victorious, then the British would have been speaking English by now, French by now. Well, actually, this is not true, because the British succeeded in defeating the French, and they don't speak English now. The French don't speak that fluent English, of course. So this is another simple way of simplifying things, that this is a myth. But we have to concentrate onto the power of social media, or the power of propaganda. What's the power of propaganda? The power of propaganda is really very interesting, because how you can really change the people and to propagate the right thing. So it came out in the 16th, 17th century, when the Pope decided to form, to make a congress that propagate the right information. So propaganda came from this way in order to combat the Protestantism and to convince the people to stay and stick to Catholicism. But this word was used again by a lot of people to propagate information. And the first propagandist, of course, was Alexander the Great, who was able to convey the message and use the tools that he had in his hand to propagate the information that he is a great leader and is a great general. And of course this was true, and he made an empire. But we always mention Alexander the Great because he was able and successful in building the ego and building the story of himself, while his father, who was a great man and was able to conquer Athens and to unite Greece and to make the basis of the empire, is always, the Philip II is always looked upon not as famous as Alexander the Great. So Alexander was able to use the media at that time to propagate his information. Then when we look about, we leave Alexander the Great and we talk about how Napoleon Bonaparte was able to use all the tools he has in his hand to make a myth, to make people believe that he was a great man. He would use painters, favor artists to draw beautiful pictures of him while conquering. He was a successful general, definitely. He was a successful leader, but he was also responsible for the loss of great lives, and almost 6 million people died because of his military adventures, if we may use the expression. And people who have seen him were not that much impressed, but the people who have seen his pictures or have heard about him or have seen or read the books that were written about him were always convinced that he was such a great man. So the using of the propaganda, whether this is positive, as in the way of Napoleon Bonaparte, or to combat the propaganda that is used to diminish the role of this man who is making an ego for himself. We know now that the British decided to make their own anti-propaganda to the propaganda of Napoleon Bonaparte by publishing journals and in French in order to hinder the picture of Napoleon Bonaparte. And this was able to use the fact that the French was a literate population. 60% of the French in the 18th century and the early 19th century were literate, so they can read. So these newspapers could reach them, and then they would start reading and understanding and going on and forward to understand more, and therefore could read the propaganda against Napoleon. The same idea of propaganda, whether these were made by the Nazis or by the Brits in the World War II, it gives you an idea. It was used extensively in World War I to try to demonize the Imperial German Army, which actually, of course, the Imperial German Army was so docile in comparison to what the Nazis did later on in World War II. So the propaganda, or using the media, always is very important task that can build heroes or demolish heroes and leaders. And that's what we see nowadays with the social media, where people are holding in their own hands mobile telephones or small computers or iPads, that information is reaching them, and so character assassination or character building or building an ego or building a character is becoming more easily done than it used to be made, but at the times of Alexander. But when we see and look how people were able to build themselves a facade of ego, we can really understand how things are going. So, an interesting book, definitely. He's sort of what we call brainstorming, or should we use the word better, food for thought. Well, this was the book of Fake History by Otto English, or the pen name of Andrew Scott. And you're still listening to The World of Info, coming live from Studio 3. So you're still listening to The World of Info, and today is The World of Books. My name is Dr. Amr MABROuk. Dua Muhammad is at the control, and we are going right away to the second book, which is brainstorming about Victoria and Albert Museum. I've visited this museum recently, and I always, whenever I go to London, I have to visit it. And definitely it's a brainstorming museum. It's a museum that really helps you to go around and gives you the sense of belonging to humanity, and gives you an idea of how some brilliant minds are capable of bringing a lot of beautiful structures together under the same roof to attract your attention, to mesmerize you, and to help you to understand the beauty of design, the beauty of art, and to feel like belonging to a universe that is full of beauty. The museum itself lies in Kingston area, and it's the first museum building to stand. It's a government. It started by an idea by Prince Albert, the husband of Queen Victoria, and he was her beloved husband. From him she had many children, and unfortunately he died early in her tenure, and she, for the rest of her life, was so faithful to his memory, and she has worn black from the moment he died until she passed away later on. And it's the leading museum of art and design. It enriches people's lives by promoting the practice of design and increasing knowledge, understanding, and enjoyment of the designed world. The museum collection was specifically intended in its very earliest incarnation to be a resource for students of art and design, and while the collections and the museum itself have transformed in the last century and a half, the ambition to inform and inspire remains unchanged. The word of using that we should use after we go to the Virginia and Albert Museum, whether you're going to stay there in 2 hours or you're going to stay for several days, you'll definitely have this feeling of being inspired. It was founded in 1852, following the enormous success of the Great Exhibition the previous year. Its founding principle was to make design available to all and to inspire British designers and manufacturers. Profits from the exhibition were used to supplement the fledgling collections of the Museum of Manufacturers, and it was used also to buy the land on which the museum stays. The museum was opened in its current site on 1857, and its collection expanded rapidly as it set out to acquire the best example of decorative art from all periods. It also acquired fine art, paintings, drawings, prints, photography, and sculpture. The museum itself grew, with new buildings being added as and when needed. Many of these structures, with their iron frames and glass roofs, were only intended to be semi-permanent exhibition halls, but some survive as part of one of the finest groups of Victorian buildings in Britain. In 1899, Queen Victoria laid the foundation stone of a new building designed to give the museum a grand facade and the main entrance. It was renamed the Victoria and Albert Museum in memory of the enthusiastic support that Prince Albert had given to its foundation. Since its 19th century beginning, the museum has continued to grow and evolve, and is now home to an immensely varied and valuable collection of art and design, numbering over 2.25 million objects. In addition to the museum at South Kensington, visitors can see the collections at the Museum of Childhood in Battle Green, dedicated to the objects designed for and by children, and at Scotland's first design museum, Victoria and Albert Dundee, due to open in 2023. Two new sites in Stratford, East London, will allow the Victoria and Albert's collections to be presented in exciting new ways, and will further expand the visitors' access to the day-to-day activities and the holdings of the museum. So yes, going through the museum, you will find yourself just mesmerized, as I was saying. The collections are huge, and it's meant to be different eras and different periods of time and different geographic distribution. So you can go around and just have a free look. And of course, for me as an Egyptian, I would love to go always to the Islamic section and the ancient Egyptian section, and to see how far this is related to our current country. And I was really mesmerized to find that in one of the biggest halls that belongs to Islamic art, we can find a beautiful wooden member of the one and only Qaitbay Mosque. And perhaps you will always ask yourself which Qaitbay Mosque that all the member has been taken from it, and it's in a very beautiful condition and transferred to the Victoria and Albert Museum. I believe it's not the Qaitbay Mosque in the Northern Cemetery, but it could be the Qaitbay Mosque in the citadel of Qaitbay in Alexandria, where it has a beautiful mosque inside the citadel if you go there, but you will not find the member. So maybe this member belongs to the Qaitbay, was taken from this mosque, which is lying in a beautiful state in the Victoria and Albert Museum. As you go into the Victoria Albert Museum, in the Islamic section, you will find also example of different arts, and especially the Arabic calligraphy, the different lines of writing, of the Arabic writings, and the different engravements of the Islamic art. Because, as you know, in mosques, the idea of drawings or of paintings, they are always in mosques area especially would take the geometrical and the plant motifs. The animal motifs are kept for being used in palaces. The number of palaces that have reached us have been much lesser than the number of mosques, because people will always undergo renovations and demolitions of the ancient and build on top of them structures. But we can always find a lot of these mosques and beautiful structures. The different sectors and the different diamonds and the gold and all types of jewels have their own sections. The section of the statues, and even the coverage of sarcophagus, whether they were able to get originally from their own burial place, or to make a cast out of them in a special hole. You can see how beautifully carved these statues of the deceased as they were put on the tombstones of them. You can go into a special section where you can see the different stained glass panels in different periods. As beside that, you can find a lot of statues that belong to modern and old designs. You can always even see dresses and portraits, statues, clocks, watches, chairs, seats, every type of things, and books carrying beautiful pictures and beautiful wine. I think a museum like this, if you ever go to London, deserves from you more than one visit, because there you will find the traces of understanding and feeling how a human mind can make and build out of scratch beautiful artworks. We end this part of our program talking about carpets and music instruments, and even though the definitely structures and portraits. So definitely, please, if you have the chance, you visit this place. If you don't have the chance to go to London, why don't you examine the book or examine the wordings and the site where you can have a sort of a visual visit to the museum on its internet site. So you're still listening to the World of Info, and we are the World of Books. Just listening to the World of Info, and today is the World of Books, and I think we're running out of the time, but definitely the third book is a must-read book. It's a book by Rasha Adli, and it's called Cairo, the City and the Memories. And there is nothing more nostalgic than to combine the idea of places and human beings and your own experience. Because Cairo have a very special place in the hearts of the people who live in it, or the people who have passed by it. And when they called it Cairo, and they have given it the name of Cairo, that is Al-Qahira, or the city victorious, or the city that is capable of winning. Well, actually, the winning city, yes. Cairo is victorious in winning your heart. You love the madness in the city, and at the same time you love the culture in the city. You love the crowd, and you love the quietness of the city. Sometimes you love the early hours of the day, and you admire the sunset. And at the same time, it's a city that is always awake 24/7. And this has been the condition of the city even during the Fatimids, when they decided to make the city as a secular or secluded, isolated military capital. And they built walls around it, and they built gates around it, and they kept the army barracks inside, and the palaces of the Khalif and the ministers, and the rest of the people are outside. The people who have to leave every night. But the people or the guards who are staying on the walls will definitely go to sleep. And the city by time has become invaded by the citizens outside the gates. Egypt gates have been always open, and Cairo gates have been always open. And to talk about the city and the memories, especially in the 19th century, when the innovation was made first of all by Muhammad Ali, who decided to renovate the city, but he was very busy with his own project of building the country and making an empire, and work that was a bit inhibited by the famous Abbas I, who decided to keep the city secluded, and he loved the desert, so he made the Abbasiyya area, and he had his palace near thereby. And then we can find Said, who preferred Alexandria than Cairo, and then Ismail, who decided to change the face of Cairo from a medieval city into a more or less cosmopolitan city. He has been to Italy, he has studied in France, and he has the idea of building a Cairo that was at the same time of the innovations made by Count Haussmann in Paris in building and the beautiful city of Paris, or the modern city of Paris of the 19th century, which is still living up to today. The Cairo work and the mixture of amalgamation between the modern Cairo, or what we call the Khedivit Cairo that we see in this in downtown Cairo, which is very close, like a walking distance from Al-Mu'azz al-Din al-Street and Al-Azhar sector and the mosque and the gates of Cairo. All this mixing and matching of the huge city of Cairo makes it very nostalgic. The work of Rasha Adli in the book is beautiful because not only she's mentioning the references, not only she is putting a lot of pictures and photos, but also she's mixing the beliefs and the human beings. Definitely to have such beautiful references going back to the origins of Cairo, whether this is in the Mamluks times or the Fatimid times, or preferably as part of the book has been dedicated to the 19th century Cairo, definitely keeps an eye of great respect to her work about Cairo, the city and the memories. So today it seems that we have come to an end of our program, and we have presented in the world of books 3 books that deserve to be read, and I hope that I have conveyed the message properly. The book of fake history, of how far history can be fakely written and how to discover the right sentence and the right wording of it. The 10 Great Lies and How They Shaped the World by Otto English or Andrew Scott. The Victoria and Albert book about the museum, which I advise you to go on the internet and examine for yourself the site, and the beautiful artifacts out of 2,250,000 artifacts that are there in the museum, just waiting for you to examine and see. And the beautiful book of Rasha Adli about Cairo, the city and the memories. We were Dr. Amr MABROUK and Dua Muhammad at the control. The program was The World of Info, World of Books. We're coming live from Studio 3 and hope that you stay tuned to Radio Cairo, FM 95.4. See you next time, same station and the same day on the Thursday.